Once I was, able to kind of steady myself, get my bearings, like I was just surrounded in this sea of people, rioters, and they just started attacking me from all directions. I experienced a group of individuals that were trying to kill me to accomplish, their goal. How we managed to make it out of that day without more significant loss of life is a miracle.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in the East. A haunting and terrifying account there from Metropolitan Police Officer Michael Fanone of the deadly insurrection that took place 4 months ago today. For Fanone and the other officers at the Capitol on January 6th, the emotional wounds and trauma are still very raw. Yesterday, he penned a letter to all elected members of the U.S. government that reads in part, quote, "The fighting here was nothing short of brutal. As the physical injuries gradually subsided, in crept the psychological trauma. I struggled daily with the emotional anxiety of having survived such a traumatic event. But I also struggle with the anxiety of hearing those who continue to downplay the events of that day and those who would ignore them altogether with their lack of acknowledgement. The indifference shown to my colleagues and I is disgraceful. The time to fully recognize these officers' actions is now." His anger and frustration, no doubt exacerbated by the GOP's latest war against one of their own, Liz Cheney, for doing what Fanone is asking for acknowledging the horror and seeking to hold those responsible to account. While Cheney has spelled out in black and white who incited the rioters, the ex-president, the continued threat of the big lie, and the extremism it inspires, others in the GOP have downplayed what happened. Like when Senator Ron Johnson called the insurrectionists festive, and when Trump said they posed zero threat. We even saw a dozen House Republicans vote against a resolution to honor the police who protected their lives that day with congressional gold medals. Acknowledgement of the danger of the big lie is at the heart of the GOP's campaign against Cheney. In her powerful op-ed in the Washington Post today, she makes a plea to fully investigate the events of January 6th and expose the lies. Quote, "We must support a parallel bipartisan review by a commission with subpoena power to seek and find facts. It will describe for all Americans what happened. This is critical to defeat the misinformation and nonsense circulating in the press and on social media. No currently serving member of Congress with an eye to the upcoming election cycle should participate. We should appoint former officials, members of the judiciary, and other prominent Americans who can be objective, just as we did after the attacks of September 11th, 2001. The commission should be focused on the January 6th attacks. The Black Lives Matter and Antifa violence of last summer was illegal and reprehensible, but it is a different problem with a different solution." Cheney's words there are striking for their urgency and for the daylight they represent between Cheney and the entire rest of her caucus on the importance of the investigation and its scope. Kevin McCarthy and other Republicans have advocated for the commission to, of course, include a look at Black Lives Matter protesters and Antifa, even though everyone knows, even them, that they were not behind the January 6th riot. But there might be more to McCarthy's pushback on a 1-6 commission. As Politico points out today, quote, "The reality is that any bipartisan commission on January 6th would almost certainly include a subpoena of McCarthy, whose call with Trump will become a central focus of any investigation. That would put McCarthy in a tough spot, forced to recount on record things Trump may not want out there." The GOP continuing to push the big lie while failing to take seriously the threat it emboldens is where we start this hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Ben Rhodes is here, former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama and an MSNBC contributor. Also joining us, Tim O'Brien, senior columnist at Bloomberg Opinion, and Tim Miller's back, writer at large at The Bulwark and former communications director for Jeb Bush's campaign. Ben Rhodes, I want to read you a little more of Liz Cheney's op-ed in today's Washington Post. She writes this: "I've worked overseas in nations where changes in leadership come only with violence, where democracy takes hold only until the next violent upheaval. America is exceptional because our constitutional system guards against that. At the heart of our republic is a commitment to the peaceful transfer of power among political rivals in accordance with law. President Ronald Reagan described this as our American miracle." Clearly, Trump rendered that miracle not the case anymore. And I think what's stunning to someone like Liz Cheney is that with this opportunity to turn the page, he's deplatformed, he lost, and then he went and lost those 2 Senate seats. The Republicans had every opportunity, and Tim Miller is so smart to always make these points. They're making affirmative choices now to continue down the path of the big lie, the insurrection, and all the danger it exposes the country to. Why?
Well, what's so extraordinary looking at this, Nicole, is what do they disagree with that Liz Cheney's saying? These are not like, she's not disavowing the Republican Party's philosophy on governing, on immigration, on taxation. She's simply saying that a violent insurrection that sought to overturn American democracy and led to the deaths of people at the workplace of her and her colleagues should be investigated, and that party officials should no longer continue to lie and say that Donald Trump somehow won the election or that there were all these fraudulently cast ballots. Like, that's basically someone saying that the party should live on planet Earth and acknowledge that the sky is blue and 2 + 2 is 4, and that, oh, by the way, as elected representatives of a democracy, we should oppose people who seek to violently overthrow that democracy. And the fact that not only can her colleagues not join her in that, but the simple act of saying and doing that could get her evicted from her leadership position, could potentially cost her support in her own primary, is absolutely extraordinary. Mm-hmm. I mean, it situates this party as a truly radical kind of far-right movement, not a kind of center-right party that happens to have disagreements with the Democrats. And it puts us in danger. It puts us in danger because the more politicians are winking at the big lie, the more some people are going to take that seriously. And they're going to be future January 6s, whether they're on a small scale or a big scale like that. And also, it makes us look absolutely ridiculous at a time when, as Joe Biden says, there's this competition between democracy and authoritarianism. Can you imagine if Boris Johnson, who I don't agree with about many things, if he tried to overthrow the results of an election leading to like a violent insurrection at the House of Commons, like, does anybody doubt that the British Conservative Party wouldn't disavow that? Of course they would. We are in uncharted territory here as a democracy.
And Tim O'Brien, the letter from Officer Fanone and his speaking out, I guess I would say I'm old enough to remember when the Republican Party would recoil at a critique like that. I think Republicans like to think of themselves as appealing to law enforcement households and law enforcement families. But their disdain for the law enforcement officials who protected them that day is now part of the brand. It's now who they are.
Right. The party of law and order has turned its back on law and order. And the common thread between what Lynn Cheney is saying and Officer Fanone is that they are asking Republicans to look at reality and look at the fact pattern and make decisions and put their principles in front of those sort of things rather than a cult of personality. But we were warned about this for a very long time. At the Republican convention a year ago, they had no platform. They merely created an event that was designed to foster a cult of personality around Donald Trump at the expense of developing an agenda of public policy decisions to make the country better. The Republicans rallied around Trump's big lie about the election being overthrown, and they've now tried to create this barrier of propaganda and myth around the events of January 6th to do the same thing. And the reason for that is they have learned from Donald Trump that propagandizing, lying, abusing the rule of law, and cynically misleading your own supporters is an effective path to power. And that's why I think we're in such a dangerous moment right now, as Ben just flagged. I think we are in a very unusual place when we see a major party with deep historical roots deciding that the best way to position itself publicly is to gaslight working Americans into believing that they're going to come up with policies that not only address white supremacy and domestic terrorism, but practical matters too, like infrastructure, national security, healthcare, and childcare for working women. There are crickets from the Republicans on every one of these issues. And Their affluent supporters are happy to be behind that because they can move forward. But working members of the Republican Party are getting snookered here.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.